So, happy almost Thanksgiving. Getting so close here. Are you guys all prepared? Not even close, right? We've got a whole ton of stuff in the fellowship hall that's going to go out. We have 13 families that we get to celebrate, help celebrate Thanksgiving this year. So we're really excited about that and grateful for that. But in the season of Thanksgiving, I thought it would be important for us to spend some time unpacking Thanksgiving. Asking questions like what it is, why do we do it? What good does it do to and for us? And I'm not talking about just the celebration we're going to have this Thursday. I'm talking Thanksgiving as a state of our heart. Thanksgiving is a state of where we are and what it means for us to be a people. But first, we need a quick history lesson. All right, y'all ready for this? In 587 BC or so, numbers, whenever we get into the Bible, are always a little tricky and such. But somewhere around this particular time, after 7 years of siege, another number, by the way, the walls of Jerusalem were breached and the city was destroyed by the nation of Babylon. And that's why when you read through the Bible, a lot of times you'll find Babylon as sort of a placeholder for all evil people, all evil things, because of this event, which took place. When they breached the walls, they did what Babylon mostly did, and that was that they would take people from the nation, the brightest and the best, the leaders, the artists, all those different people, and they would take them back to their city, back to their area. And so most of the populace was deported to Babylon. And for about 70 years or so, most of the population lived in exile. And actually, it's where we got most of what we refer to as the Old Testament, or our brothers and sisters across the street refer to as the sacred scriptures. It was written in those times. They lived in exile until the Persian Empire conquered Babylon. There's always a bigger fish somewhere, right? And through the decree of Cyrus, that's written about in 2 Chronicles, they allowed for the return of the Jews to their land and the rebuilding of the city walls, of the temple, and of the city. The chief architect of this rebuilding was a man by the name of Nehemiah, who was sent by King Artaxerxes. You want to look good at your next cocktail party? Say, King Artaxerxes, to be the governor. And after the work was completed, Nehemiah and his right-hand man, Ezra, called the people together to dedicate the wall and to give thanks. Hence, the reason that I'm using this text to highlight the idea of Thanksgiving. Their Thanksgiving flowed from a different place from our Thanksgiving. And if you read through the first few chapters of the book of Nehemiah, you find a pattern that develops within. They flowed from 4 prerequisites that Nehemiah and Ezra felt were important for people to dwell on as they thought about Thanksgiving. And it's almost as though if we do not do this, if we do not have the idea of these 4 prerequisites to Thanksgiving, our Thanksgiving isn't real. It hasn't been thought through. It hasn't been processed. Those 4 things are this. First, they reminded the people who they were. They talked about who they were, that they were chosen by God to be his own children. Now, while that sounds good, well, it sounds good. You're a child of God. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So we have to remember in context. We have to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a Clairville? What does it mean to be a believer in God? What does it mean to be a Tastian or a Bound? Or a Maldonado. I almost called you McCarthy. I just do it because he can't yell at me now. He had throat surgery, so I'm praying for you, buddy. So we have to remember who we are in context. Sure, you're a child of God, but as a child of God, you have a greater responsibility to also remember your circumstances, to remember your history, where you came from. Yes, you were God's children. But being God's children also meant that you were included in your history was this whole Babylon thing. It was included the whole Exodus thing. To remember that you were a landless, wandering people. And you needed to be taught this. You need from the age that our children were when they first walked out that door, to be taught 1 John 4, 7, and 8, to be taught what are the things that that bring us together as a family and make us who we are. And to teach this, Ezra and Nehemiah instituted what they refer to as the Feast of Tabernacles. You probably have never heard of this, but when Jesus says, I am the pure water of life, he's talking into the Feast of Tabernacles. There's a huge discourse that takes place during that particular time. So what's the Feast of Tabernacles? I've talked about it before, but I think it bears repeating. The Feast of Tabernacles was when our brothers and sisters, faith grandparents, would go out into their backyards or onto their roof or out into some area that was not a home, and they would build themselves some sort of a structure. They would use palm branches or they would use something like that, and they would sit outside and they would light fires and they would tell the story of the 40 years of wandering in Israel. And so this connection with the idea of remembering who we are helps us then with the context of where we are. That again, we once were a landless people, people who were wandering. And that always needs to come into our thinking and who we are. But third, we had to remember that honestly. We had to remember where that happened from and where it came from. That we had to remember that it was God who released us from Egypt, but there were many people who died through that process. Many of our people, many of the Egyptians. And so they had to remember that and take that honestly. That should lead them toward who they really were and to honestly see how we have messed this thing up. Because that's always a part of it. You know, people always talk about the fact that, well, we need to have an honest reckoning of what happened with the Pilgrims and the Indians and all that kind of stuff. And you know my answer to that is, yes, we absolutely do. We need to be honest about that. We need to be honest what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. We need to be honest about that. Why? Because we have to find out where we actually can live within this, how we actually can live within this. And so rather than hiding the truth, we look at it. And we have to remember that as we realize what our forefathers have done or what we have done, how we have contributed to this, that should lead us to the final aspect of, that should lead us rather into confession. And so as we remember honestly who we are, that leads to confession. Of course it does. If you have somebody coming over on Thursday and you don't have enough food for them, which would be horrifying, right? What would you say to them? Yeah, you get over it. You need to lose a few pounds anyway, right? Of course not. You would say, I'm sorry. Exactly. Maybe even run out and grab some more food for them, right? You'd go out and you'd do something along those lines. When we recognize when we confront our past and recognize what has happened, that leads to confession. But, and this is important, and we often miss this step, when we recognize the whole of what happened, then what we do is we make a covenant to stand together. So if your person who comes over to the meal and has no food on Thursday says to you, well, you didn't have any food for me, that's it, I'm leaving, and knocks the dirt off their sandals and walks away from you, that doesn't help the situation, does it? We agree as a community, as a faith, as a people, to stand together. And that is what happened in the book of Nehemiah. All of this created a sense then of true thanksgiving for the people. And this is what they said. Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra, the priest, the scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, this is a day that is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn. Do not weep. For all of the people wept when they heard the words of the law. And then he said to them, go your way. Eat the fat. Amen? Drink sweet wine. Maybe not sweet wine, but drink a wine. Send portions of them for whom nothing has prepared. You see that pattern within here? For this day is holy to our Lord. And do not be grieved. Say this out loud with me. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Now in Hebrew, joy translates the word simcha. And its word can be broken into two parts. Sim, which means put, and cha, which is the Hebrew word for laughter. So if you want some joy, put some laughter in your life, right? As we know around here, because one of our mission statements is that we are a people who love to laugh. But we know that joy and laughter is often practiced in tension, isn't it? It's funny because it's true, right? We laugh at ourselves. I have to laugh or else I'll never stop crying. That's a part of laughter. It's honestly looking at ourselves. In Psalm 126, the writer says, "And then our mouths were filled with laughter and our tongues with shouts of joy. And then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them." But all of that is based upon pain. The psalmist knows that out of those great things of joy often come out of deep pain, sorrow. Simcha is not just for happy, happy joy times. Simcha is also used as a pathway to get through, to find the joy of our lives after we have been laid siege to by the nation state of Babylon, after our walls and city have been destroyed, after our brightest and best have been taken away from us, after we have spent 70 years under the thumb of the conquering heroes, the conquering armies that took us over. Then we can stand and say, the joy of the Lord is our strength. Then we can remember that in Egypt we suffered under Pharaoh. Then we can remember all of these things, that God has been with us and through us and for us in that entire time. The Hebrew word for thanksgiving is chadodah, and the root of which is yada, which is closely related to yada and means intimacy. You know the Seinfeld bit where it's yada, yada, yada? It's basically sex, sex, sex. That's what it is. That's what it means. Intimacy, 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 intimacy. And Thanksgiving then leads to intimacy with God. But yada also means something else. It means confession. So it means intimacy and it means confession, something that should come as no surprise to anyone who is intimate with another person. Because men, what do we have to constantly say? You're right, I'm sorry. Right? We have to do that all the time. Well, maybe you don't, I do. So Nehemiah reminds us who we are. And as he reminds us who we are honest about who we are. We see that we have messed up things. We see that we have to confess the things that we have messed up. And we have to vow to stand together and to give thanks. Honest thanksgiving comes from confession and leads to joy and leads to laughter. When we're sitting around the table on Thursday, if we don't deal with the elephants that are there at the table, there will be no joy, there will be no laughter. Because we'll be worrying about the elephants. If we can't let those things go and just be together, there will be no joy. There will be no laughter. Dealing with the issues that are there that lead us into Thanksgiving are doorways into the presence of God and into the presence of intimacy with Him. Thanksgiving leads us to reflect on the astounding power of gratitude. And therefore, to commit ourselves to cultivating an honest, thankful heart. But unfortunately, we often get stuck in gratitude. Did your mom ever make you write thank you notes when you were a kid? Did you hate it? One person didn't hate it, everybody else did. The hope is that the reason you didn't hate it was because you saw the joy in it, the good in it. The problem is when writing a thank you note becomes something that we have to do, we don't feel grateful about it, right? We have no gratitude. We get stuck in gratitude as a kind of duty. Your grandma gives you a present and your mom says, say thank you to your grandma. And, thank you, Grandma. If Thanksgiving devolves into a duty only, we've missed the boat of gratitude. It doesn't mean anything. And we will effectively reduce one of God's primary motivators of a good life into just good manners. you really should say thank you. No, what you should do is you should develop a heart of gratitude. So Thanksgiving is a vital force in the world. It's just one of those things that we don't think of as cultivating, so we don't think of it along those lines. It is profoundly dignifying to the person who's giving the gratitude and the person who is receiving the gratitude. It is something that builds relationships between those people. It is something that builds communities, healthy communities, and healthy human hearts. In study after study, Thanksgiving has been shown to lead to stronger relationships, better sleep, lower blood pressure, fewer trips to the doctor, fewer depressive symptoms, more patience, more perseverance, close relationships, and increased empathy. Just by writing a thank you note. No, just by being grateful. Just by giving thanks. Just to saying to somebody, I really appreciate you. If Ted Lasso did nothing for us, it taught us to say, I appreciate you. Now, if we could just mean it. But it will not serve those roles if we separate it from Nehemiah's promise of honest reflection, of confession, and steadfast community. And that's why the whole wind beneath, what if the wind beneath your wings is a downdraft title comes from this morning. Have you ever heard of the headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry? I'm sure you study it all the time, right? I'm sure. You know what asymmetry means? It means unevenness, lopsided, out of whack. Something's not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical. Okay? In this case, what is out of whack is asymmetrical. It's what we perceive as propelling us forward, or what we perceive as holding us back. So what might be propelling you forward, for example, could be that you came from a really good family, your parents loved you, you always felt like you had enough, you have a great community around you, have a good education, you were born in the United States, any of these sorts of things. What held you back was none of those things were true, or whatever, right? Just that idea of the things that you count as holding you back. Those are your headwinds, the things you're up against. The tailwinds are those good things that propel you forward. When we are not grateful people, when we are not people of gratitude, our tendency is to focus on our obstacles, our headwinds. It's what we do. Well, I can't do that because this, right? Or our tendency is, conversely, to overlook our tailwinds. The fact that people have come alongside of me, the people that have given me grace and love and forgiveness. Over time, this is going to lead to an imbalance that will lead us feeling angry and resentful. When we focus on what we're having to fight against, our headwinds, we breed bitterness. When we focus on what's been given to us, our tailwinds, we grow appreciation. The simple act of thanksgiving makes all the difference. The simple act of thanksgiving helps call our attention back to the winds beneath our wings and at our backs. One of my dear rabbi friends, a man by the name of Rich Flom, calls this a disease of the heart. The whole idea of focusing too much on our headwinds, a disease of the heart. In his blog, he quotes the Genesis story of Jacob and Esau. It says Esau hated Jacob. You remember the story? Because of the blessing that his father had blessed him. It turns out Jacob had stolen the blessing, but that, and so Esau had every reason to hate him. Thanksgiving dinner at their house, I'm sure, was a little bit difficult. But Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father, who had just died, my days of mourning for my father are at an end, and I will kill my brother Jacob. Excellent. But what Rich reminds us here is that Esau isn't angry because he lost the blessing from his father. Esau didn't actually want what Jacob got. There's a previous verse that was there that said, "By your," this is from Jacob to Esau, or it is to Esau, I'm sorry. By this your sword you shall live. Not that you will kill people, but by your hunting. That is your gift, Esau. That is the gift he wanted. That is the gift that he got. And Esau actually got what he wanted. And still he hated Jacob. Why? Because he was his little brother. They were twins, but, he's still his little brother. He hated Jacob because Jacob received something of value from their father, and Esau couldn't see the value of what he had received. He focused more on his headwinds than on his tailwinds, which is what we do. When we resent those who benefit more than we do, that is a struggle for most of us, and it is a difficult thing for us to acknowledge. But it's all around us. We see it in our political and civil discourse, if you can call what we do today civil discourse. We see it couched in our language of racism and class warfare. The only way to combat this bitterness and to cultivate thanksgiving is by honestly starting with who we are. This is who I am. Honestly seeing how we've messed things up. This is what I've done. Honestly confessing that. And vowing to stand together and giving thanks. This Wednesday night at 7 o'clock in the evening, we're going to gather in this sanctuary to really do one thing and one thing only. And that one thing is just to say what we are thankful for. An entire service. We're going to have communion. We're going to sing some songs. We're going to do a liturgy. But an entire service turned over just to say, I am thankful for this. And we are going to build hearts of gratitude as we conclude this year together